What's up, y'all? It's your boy KK back for another Thirsty Thursday talk. I am filming this in advance, but I have my cousin Mike. He's all the way from British Columbia.
Yep.
Right? And he was kind enough to bring some non-alcoholic beverages. It's Henderson Brewing Company, Pearson Express IPA, Toronto style. So we're gonna go ahead and crack them open. It's 16 ounce.
How full were you making it?
I don't think it'll all fit in.
Okay.
It's close.
Okay.
You might have to
Yeah.
suck a little.
Are you editing this out?
It just fits
Just
right.
Yeah.
Cheers. I don't want to spill
my
mine.
friend and cousin. I'm grateful to know you. It has a bite, doesn't it? It's a good bite.
He has what, about 50% of your taste back. I'm around. I don't know, maybe a little over 20%, I guess. So we're really relying on Mike for his analysis of it, because honestly, it kind of tastes like. Kind of has like a light lemonade taste, in my opinion.
A light lemonade, that's a good description. Okay. It has a flavor that I don't mind. That the question is, would I drink it and buy it again?
Would you?
Right? Yeah, I think I would. As a non-alcoholic, right?
Beverage.
It's one of the better non-alcoholic beverages. And I did some research on this over the internet with my Canadian friends, actually having put some comments about it, which I was surprised of. And their comments were good.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and that's one reason
why you bought
it. I recognized the name. And I didn't even know that it was made in Toronto or had a Toronto association, so this is a surprise to me.
Well, that's pretty cool. So thanks for the non-alcoholic beer.
And maybe I can find that particular brand with alcohol whenever I return to that realm. And I would recommend it to anyone who, does want to try a non-alcoholic beer and support our Canadian industry.
Awesome. So we're going to transition into talking a little bit about Mike. And like for those that don't know, he does live in Canada, lived in Toronto, and then moved to Abbotsford.
Yeah.
And now he lives pretty remote in BC, British Columbia, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're gonna kind of talk about his remote living life, and he did go through a heart attack recently where he almost lost his life. So we'll talk about that and kind of what's changed with his dietary and perspective of life, if that's changed at all. So the first question is, how do you enjoy remote living? Because you're so isolated out there. So, if you want to talk a little bit about your abode that you live in, what's your living condition like? And
well, it's a long story, so let's get started.
Buckle up.
I was in Toronto visiting my family, and my sister developed cancer. So we're going to start at the beginning of this adventure. And so I went back home from BC to be with her and moved to Windsor, Ontario, which is near Detroit, for those who don't know that area very well. And lived there for a year while my sister was undergoing chemotherapy and radiation. And we thought that, and she thought that she was recovering, and in mission at some point. So I ended up from Windsor buying my camper van, moving back to British Columbia because I thought she was back in track, and she even went full-time back to work. So we were all happy and everything. And then 6 months later, she developed cancer of the kidney and passed away within 2 weeks of my getting back to Vancouver area. So I, in the meantime, visited some friends and wanted to get back into British Columbia campgrounds where I had planned to go and tour around the rest of British Columbia and find a home. And when I got to Salt Spring Island, which is a part of the Gulf Spring Islands, COVID struck back in 21, and I got stuck on Salt Spring Island. I couldn't get out of there, right?
Oh no.
So I had to stay in Salt Spring Island, on Salt Spring Island, for 6 months before the ferries would allow us to get on board their boats and with a vehicle and go anywhere. So that was the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to the point where after 6 months they cleared us to board these ferries and traveled back onto the mainland, and then found a campground who would allow me to take my vintage camper van, and they said, if you can get it here, you can come. Their concern was that if it was older than 10 years, it may not get off the campground, and then I'd be stuck there and they'd be stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, eventually, I ended up moving off the campground because I was offered an opportunity to take a rustic old cabin, and you can see that for yourselves if you want under mikepeterhansel.gmail.com. Just the way it sounds. If you can find me on Facebook. Now, I got a lot of pictures there, but it's a rustic cabin, really rustic, and it looks like a cabin, and it is definitely the perfect home for someone who wants to be by themselves for a while and enjoy the peace and quiet of nature, surrounded by a rainforest, few neighbors, a lot of dogs. So I had more than 1 or 2 neighbors with dogs and their puppies or whatever. So that was very comforting, and they loved me because I naturally loved them. So anyway, when I went to visit some friends in Abbotsford for my 75th birthday, I was celebrating, and then a day or so later I got a call from my landlord saying, get your butt out here, we've had a flood.
Mm.
And what happened is all the conditions of the river rain storms and the melt from the mountains and the rising stream levels created a flood through our neighborhood and wiped out the campground that I had just been staying at. And if I had stayed in that campground during that time, I would have been washed away by the flood with me in the camper and probably would have drowned. So I was very lucky to survive that experience. Anyway, on the matter of the cabin, my landlord called me and said, hey, try and get your camper van up here so it wouldn't get washed out by the coming flood,
right,
which hadn't reached me yet. And so I drove it up there to his place just up the road and tried to start packing my things to take me and my car off the property where my cabin was, up with the camper van. In the meantime, coincidence would have it that the 2 dogs that I was watching over from one of my neighbors had wandered to hook up with a fellow with a backpack that went to the tunnels. We call them the tunnels, which are a series of railway tracks going underneath, some places where it was very rocky. And the tunnels became overflowed, the parking lot became overflowed, and I was driving our neighbor, our landlord's wife back up the hill after I took possession of the dogs and put them in safety at the house where they were living. And while I was driving her up my tunnels road onto the road that connected us to the upper hill behind us, the flood hit. A tsunami appeared, full of logs and debris and everything coming straight at us. And we didn't have a choice. We were stuck right there. And at the meantime, the flood tried to go up the hill to the left of us and couldn't, of course, go too high, and started coming down to the left of us, pushing the car almost into the flood to the right of us.
Right.
So here we are, stuck in the middle of a flood with logs and debris that could have damaged us or prevented us from going any further. So I looked at my neighbor, landlord's wife, and I said, Marion, we're gonna drown. So I made a joke, which I used to take pleasure in. Any situation is worth telling a joke about. And I said, Marion, your husband Bill, my landlord, is never going to speak to me again if I let you drown. But in the meantime, I was able to just nudge the car up the hill with the water rushing down from the front and from the left, pushing us in there. But gradually, little by little, I was able to get it above the road level that was leading up the hill and cleared out, in time.
Right.
So the problem I received at that end was that I was stressed out and living in a cabin and having very little social life. And I realized that, hey, I miss my friends, I miss doing stuff with the society that was living around me, but I didn't know that many people in the neighborhood, most of whom were also, struggling. And then I ended up being so stressed out and doing things to sort of take me away from the stress by working hard around the yard and clearing things and lifting things, and developed high blood pressure, which I wasn't aware of, and ended up having a heart attack, a year ago.
At the cabin?
At the cabin.
By yourself?
Yes.
And who's the closest neighbor?
Now, to backtrack a little,
okay,
I'll make the story even more interesting. I was trying to clean the floor in the cabin, and I unintentionally mixed 3 chemicals in a pail, which turned out to mix together and create a caustic fume.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, can you imagine? And here I'm struggling to breathe, and the fumes were making my lungs and throat sore and chest pain and everything. And I said, oh shoot, I better get out of here. And I ran out of the bathroom trying to hyperventilate and whatnot. And the burning was so bad that the next morning it was still sore, and I thought I'd better get myself to the hospital. So I ended up going to the hospital, and they checked me out, and I told them the story. They did all their tests. They basically came back and said, well, Mike, I'm sorry to say, but it wasn't the fumes that got you. You had a heart attack.
Oh, shoot.
And I mean, that was a pretty strange thing to tell me, because I didn't even think that.
Right,
I had no idea that it had hurt me that badly. So the problem I have now is I have to deal with a situation I wasn't prepared for. But fortunately, I have a very strong constitution, and my body has taken a lot of pain and suffering over the years. Not to whine and complain, of course, but I had already been struggling with certain issues, including mental, stress throughout this whole experience. So after a while, I went to the doctor after the diagnosis from the hospital, and he put me on a strict regimen of medications and other things to try and minimize the effect of the heart attack. And don't get me wrong, I was worried, but at the same time, I was prepared to go if that's the way the powers that be have in mind for me. But I pushed through it, and I'm very aware that we can influence the conduct of our life and the eventual result of such catastrophes in our lives if we stay focused on the idea of survival and believing in your personal ability to overcome any such situation if we have the fortitude and the focus, determination to hang in there.
Right.
So I honestly can say to you that if you can overcome these situations, regardless how severe, regardless how unpredictable, regardless of the outcome, stay focused and do your best to stay healthy, and you need some rest. So obviously living in a cabin in the rainforest away from a lot of pesky neighbors and their dogs who like to come and visit and jump on you and bark and carry on, that you can overcome just about anything that you have to deal with. And to make matters worse, not being shy about trying to get stronger after my first heart attack, I went back to doing yard work and doing other things that was probably putting stress on my health as well. And I had developed some high blood pressure, high blood sugars from diabetes and other issues that seemed to bring forth a second heart attack. Now I must go backwards a little bit and say that after my first heart attack, I had to get 2 stents put in my heart, which are they open up the blood vessels to the heart, which might have been jammed with plaque, from bad habits of eating and drinking.
Yeah.
So we were all worried, my doctors in particular, that I would, when I went back after my second heart attack, they sent me straight back to the hospital in Vancouver to give me a 3rd stent to make up for the one they said failed me, was bad, didn't work properly. So I went through a second, situation of almost passing away and near-death experience. And that made me even more determined to get more physically and emotionally and mentally equipped to go forward from that experience. Because you sort of figure after a while, geez, if I've had 2 heart attacks, then what's the chance of a 3rd,
Right.
So I've got to focus on getting as healthy as I possibly can, good diet, good nutrition, good attitude, trying hard to exercise frugally without overstraining myself and making things worse, right? And I had high blood sugar, high blood pressure, all of which was coming down because of my determined to stick to my medication, stick to the diet, not eat too much sugar and other things that could make things worse for me. So I can honestly tell you, things like drinking non-alcoholic beer would allow you 2 pleasures. One, drinking beer, and secondly, not being, influenced by the alcohol,
Right.
which my doctor said was a no-no. And I encourage people to minimize your alcohol use if possible. Stick to the lighter beers and the lighter alcohol levels and so on, so that you can survive beyond the expectations of most people who die at a young age because they're overdoing it
Right.
in all the ways that I've described. So please consider non-alcoholic beer, non-alcoholic wine, non-alcoholic alcohol, if you can get that, or at least minimize the level of alcohol, and I assure you, you will probably live much longer.
That's very well said. I think you really nailed everything that you just said, and I didn't have to ask any more questions because everything got answered. So you perfectly nailed that.
And feel free to respond to Kelvin with any questions you may have, and he will hopefully be able to answer them by asking me.
Yes.
What I can add to the success of this particular video.
All right. Well, cheers. That was awesome, Mike.
Cheers. Oh, right. I got to drink.